That controversial Save Voting Act passed in the House today, but here's the thing. The bill's future is very unclear in the Senate. The final vote in the House was 220 to 208. 5 representatives did not vote. All Republicans voted yes, and 4 Democrats joined them to vote yes. They include Representatives Case of Hawaii, Cuellar of Texas, Golden of Maine, and Perez of Washington. Now, I know you want to know what is in this bill. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. H.R. 22, the SAVE Act, is sponsored by Representative Chip Roy of Texas. The point of this law, according to Congressman Roy, is to ensure that only citizens of the United States are allowed to be registered to vote in federal elections. Now, the reality is it's already a federal crime to register to vote if you are not a U.S. citizen, but regardless of that fact, this bill does several things, including establishing a federal voter registration form and then requiring every registered voter to provide in person what's called documentary proof of United States citizenship. No matter which way you register to vote, whether it's in person, at the DMV, when you get a driver's license, by mail, or on the same day when you vote, this bill would require you to first provide that documentary proof of U.S. citizenship.
And speaking of requirements, turning 65 brings important decisions about Medicare, folks. And understanding when you're required to apply is key to avoiding penalties and coverage gaps. And if you're not receiving Social Security benefits, you must actively sign up for Medicare during your initial enrollment period, 3 months before to 3 months after your 65th birthday, okay? You'll also need to enroll if you don't have health insurance through an active employer with 20 or more employees, or if you're covered by retiree plans, COBRA, marketplace plans, or a small employer plan, fewer than 20 employees, as Medicare becomes your primary coverage in these cases. Navigating Medicare and its complexities and its over 24,000 plans can feel overwhelming at the very least. Don't go at it alone. Call Chapter today for free and speak with a qualified representative with our partner Chapter, and they'll guide you through your options, ensuring you make the best choices for your healthcare needs. Take action now, folks. It's 100% free to call, and your peace of mind is just a call away. Give Chapter a call, 270-467-2426, 270-467-2426. There's additional information in the description, pinned comment down below. Visit their website, askchapter.org/Kevin.
And if that proof is not provided, this bill says a state may not register an individual to vote in an election for federal office.
Well, the House passed the SAVE Act, which makes it so married women can't fucking vote without a passport. If you changed your last name, which almost all married women change their fucking last name. And now you won't be able to vote unless you have a passport. Passports cost about $160, by the way. So unless you have one, you are not going to be able to vote if you've changed your name. This is just another way, too, to prevent trans people from voting, because most trans people have changed their name on their, documents. So highly, highly, highly recommend young women not take their husband's name legally. Do not do it. Don't do it. There's no fucking reason to anyways. It's an old, archaic thing that traditionally we do, but it doesn't mean shit. Don't do it.
I really needed to chime in on this one because this young lady, being generous here in this term, says that this is encouraging women not to vote because of an old archaic tradition of taking your husband's last name, and shouldn't do it. Meanwhile, completely glosses over the idea that it's perfectly okay for you to change your gender, change your sex, and that's fine. This is obviously a ploy to prevent trans people from voting. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. But women, no, God, no. Do not get married to men. Do not get married. Or better yet, how does this apply to women marrying other women and lesbian relationships? Where is that argument? Where is that justification? Where is that tradition that should be avoided, ma'am? And I really just wanted this video to be a quick everything you needed to know about the SAVE Act today, but I was playing it back. I was rewatching the edit before I uploaded it and published it to go live, and I couldn't help myself, guys. I had to chime in. I wanted to at least apply some logic to this situation, or at least some counter to the completely insane, ridiculous, and just so far left off base ideology of everything President Trump, everything Republicans, everything MAGA, everything America, everything that the party of common sense is doing is wrong. Hardly the case.
So what are these documents that are required to prove you are a U.S. citizen? Your driver's license is not going to do it. You need to present documentation of your full legal name that also proves you are a U.S. citizen with either a valid U.S. passport, a valid military ID card, a valid government-issued photo ID card that also shows your place of birth in the United States, or a combination of all the documents you had to provide to get a real ID. If you don't have any of those things, you can present a valid government-issued photo ID card issued by a federal, state, or tribal government, like a driver's license, but only if you also provide either your birth certificate that proves you were born in the United States, or U.S. hospital records proving you were born in the United States, or an adoption decree that proves you were born in the United States, a consular report of your birth abroad issued by the Secretary of State, a naturalization certificate issued by Homeland Security, or an American Indian card issued by Homeland Security. Now, voting rights groups say since there are already federal laws on the books that make voting as a non-citizen a felony in this country, this SAVE Act is nothing more than a way to suppress and restrict voting rights. The League of Women Voters says 69 million American women lack the proper documentation that this bill would require that reflects their current name, mostly because lots of married women change their last name to their husband's last name and then don't necessarily change the documents that are required to prove their citizenship as offered in this bill.
The reason Democrats don't want voter ID is because they make it much more difficult for elderly people, people that don't travel, don't have a passport, poor people, that don't have cars, don't have driver's licenses. So it's sort of a vestige of, I think, post-slavery laws where Black people had to prove their right to vote, and oftentimes they couldn't vote because they couldn't pass some crazy test or they didn't have the appropriate ID. It also affects women that are married. Maybe your passport reflects something that's different on your birth certificate or on your driver's license. So really the bottom line is voter suppression. And I agree with him 100%. It's a brilliant notion that less voter ID laws allows more people to vote. And most democracies do it that way. We're the only ones that really don't do it that way.
Right. I mean, I think it's been considered fact by most that the more people that vote, the more likely it is that Democrats have an advantage.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it does make sense.
That's why there's gerrymandering,
right.
And that's why there's voter suppression, and that's why Republicans want this voter ID stuff.
But it's not just married women who are going to be impacted here if this thing passes. Other voting rights advocates say this law would cause unnecessary burdens and chaos for all registered voters, because now everyone is going to have to physically go down and present this documentary proof of U.S. citizenship in order to be allowed to register or stay registered. Look, several individual states, including Kansas, Arizona, Alabama, and Georgia, have tried to pass similar laws. They either have been struck down as illegal or ended up costing so much money to implement and check all that documentation from all these eligible voters that it just becomes impractical. The other reality here is this is the second time that Republicans have passed the SAVE Act in the House. They also passed it last year. This law went nowhere in the Senate because it would need 60 votes, which means in this Senate, at least 7 Democrats would have to also get on board. And that is likely not going to happen this year either. And even if by some miracle it did pass the Senate, then it would immediately be challenged in the courts. So if you want to see how your lawmaker voted, or if you want to read this HR 22 SAVE Act for yourself, I'm going to email both of them out to you in my Facts HQ email tonight, so make sure you sign yourself up.
In other news, the fake news media has picked a fight with the wrong person. CNN got itself in quite the feud with the director of national intelligence. And what did Chuck Schumer say? Oh, they got 6 ways from Sunday? Well, Tulsi Gabbard did it the right way. Her lawyers sent a cease and desist letter last week to CNN threatening to sue them if they published what her lawyers are calling a defamatory piece against her, which seems to be incorrect according to her. So what did CNN do? They published the story anyway. The piece accuses Gabbard of voter fraud, claiming that she voted in Hawaii during the 2024 election while having declared a homestead in Texas. Now, her lawyers argue that she lives and pays taxes in Hawaii, which should be really easy to prove, and that the Texas homestead declaration was only for security reasons to protect her and her family from threats, which makes a ton of sense, folks. Not only did CNN ignore the facts, shocker, CNN, right? They published the story behind a paywall, making it only for subscribers, which is like 11 people who pay $4. Who would pay $4 a month for CNN's behind the paywall look? I mean, these guys are not that star-spangled awesome.
I've got a long list of things that we're investigating. We have the best of the best going after this. Election integrity being one of them. We have evidence of how these electronic voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time. And vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of the votes being cast, which further drives forward your mandate to bring about paper ballots across the country so that voters can have faith in the integrity of our elections.
Hey, Congressman.
Hey, what's happening? You're everywhere, man.
Yeah. What the fuck is going on with the SAVE Act?
Oh, you mean the Save the Republicans' Ass Act? It's the only way they can win elections is by making it absolutely impossible for people to vote. The SAVE Act would make it impossible. It'd be a ban on married women from voting. Why? Because it would require you to have your birth certificate to prove who you are to go and vote. Well, married women who change their name, they're not going to have a document that shows that. So it's crazy. It's just another way to obstruct people from going to the ballot box. All it does is save Republicans. It doesn't save our democracy.
The man with the exclusive on that letter, Brent Scher, managing editor of the Daily Wire. This is like CNN, they do it to themselves.
Yeah, Carl, what's funny here, and thanks for having me on, is this is probably the first voter fraud story that CNN's covered
That's
in
a
years.
Good point.
Like, literally 2 years ago, they actually had a headline that said voter fraud doesn't exist, part infinity. So what actually happened here, and we actually had the story before CNN did because we got in touch with Tulsi Gabbard's team at DNI and also with the lawyers, is she purchased a house in 2024 in Texas, in mainland United States, because as you know, Hawaii is 10 hours away from Washington, D.C., where now much of her work is. So she obviously needs a homeland address. And then CNN all of a sudden cares about the fact that she may have voted in Hawaii, where she was raised, not born, but lived almost her entire life.
And probably
registered. Served in Congress, where she still considers herself a resident. They're upset that she should have voted in Texas because she declared that her homestead. Now, like you said, the reason she declared it her homestead is because a lot of people dislike Tulsi Gabbard, and it is not good for a public figure like that to have a public address. And the only way to protect that information in Texas is to declare it your homestead. So on the advice of local officials, they told her to do that. Mm-hmm. That obviously doesn't mean that she considers herself a Texas resident, and she's still voting in Hawaii and considers herself a Hawaiian.
Right.
I mean, also interesting is it's more beneficial to be a Texas resident. In Texas, you pay 0 income tax. In Hawaii, you pay the highest income tax in the country. I think the state income tax is around 11%. So
crazy.
I mean, this is just a lot of anger from CNN because Tulsi Gabbard is in the Trump administration, not because they're actually scandalized about where she thinks she lives.
I hope she sues the pants off of these people and they just go on.
This bill could force Georgians to pay more than $700 million just to register to vote. Y'all, that's the poll tax. plain and simple, and it's blatant voter suppression. Voter suppression by any other name.
Mr. Speaker,
time has
could I yield?
The gentleman from New York.
Yes, sir. I'd like to yield an additional 30 seconds to
The gentleman is extended. The gentlewoman from Georgia, 30 seconds.
Voter suppression by any other name is still voter suppression. This bill violates the 14th, 19th, and 24th Amendments, and is also every tenet of a free and inclusive democracy. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this disgrace of a voter suppression bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
California.
California.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli. I rise in strong opposition to the so-called SAVE Act, a bill that is a modern-day poll tax targeting American women and low-income Americans. This bill bans voter ID. It bans using driver's licenses as voter ID unless they're backed by additional proof of citizenship, a requirement that excludes nearly all driver's licenses and real IDs issued today. Now, for women who have changed their names, often through marriage, this means showing a passport or a birth certificate that may not match their legal name. That would have meant that my grandmother, who had long since lost her birth certificate, would have been ineligible to vote under this bill. In California alone, that would include more than 7 million women. Now, this would force those women to pay $130 just to get a passport they need to vote. With nearly a third of Californians lacking passports, this bill would cost them more than $1.25 billion statewide. If you have to pay to vote, that's called a poll tax, plain and simple. It is also unnecessary red tape for people just trying to cast a ballot. This is a bill in search of a problem. We have enough trouble getting American citizens to vote.
The gentleman reserves his time.
Because most of the federal spending is entitlements. That's like the big one to eliminate. Because that's the sort of $500 billion, maybe $700 billion a year. That is also a mechanism by which the Democrats attract and retain illegal immigrants by essentially paying them to come here and then turning them into voters.
Yes.
So this is why the Democrats are so upset about the situation, because they're losing, if we turn off this gigantic money magnet for illegal immigrants, then they will leave and they will lose voters. Where you'll see the biggest outcry is from the Democrats who are, they don't want the waste and fraud to be turned off because it is a gigantic magnet to attract illegal immigrants and have them stay in the country. And I mean, you see some of the crazy stuff, like where money from FEMA, which is meant, FEMA is an agency that's meant to take care of Americans in distress. And a bunch of their money was being sent to pay for luxury hotels in New York for illegal immigrants. And that was happening even after the president was elected, even after he signed an executive order saying that needs to stop. So we actually made sure that money did stop going, because it's obviously outrageous that American taxpayer money is spent on luxury hotels for illegals. But you have to say, why was that being done? It was because the Democrats are trying to import voters, basically.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah. And that's also why there's no voter ID needed. In fact, in California and New York State, you're not allowed to show voter ID. Doesn't that seem insane?
Insane.
Yeah.
I say that as a New Yorker. It's insane.
Yeah, insane.
And it violates the entire Constitution and the principles behind it.
Yes.